Hi, thanks for being here. To get us started, we're going to do a quick round of intros where they're going to tell you a little bit about their company as well as how many startups you've worked in or run. Ruben, why don't you kick us off?
Hi everybody, I'm the co-founder CEO of Career Karma. This is my first company that I've started, but I've worked at 3 before. Essentially, Career Karma helps people navigate their career through coaching, and over time we integrated technology to help people through an AI bootcamp advisor, and now we're arming developers like founders at Parity and Leopard and others like that to optimize their different experiences, like the job search experience or the employee experience, to continue to accelerate and unlock human potential in the workforce.
Hi, I'm Jacinda. I'm one of the co-founders at Apero. Theoretically, I'm the non-technical co-founder, but you wouldn't know it by looking at my GitHub profile. I was the first employee and engineer at Doctor on Demand, which is now Included Health before this. And then before that, I worked at a company on the East Coast that didn't brand itself as a startup. So this is the first company I've started, like my fellow panelists, but also probably the third startup that I've been at. Apero is a full end-to-end platform for anyone building in the healthcare space. We work with everyone from some of the largest telemedicine companies in the country, operating in all 50 states like Spring and Health, down to a small 2-physician pediatric practice in Southern California. So, very wide range of things to work on.
Thank you. And Jesse.
Hello, hello. Very excited to be here. So this is my third company I've started, 3 times the charm. And I've probably been a part of 5 startups in total. So Tanda is a company that we have a mobile social app that helps people save money together. We're here to change the world, make it better. And there's going to be 3 unicorns here. So this is
More than 3. We have 9 in the room.
Sorry, 9, yes.
All right, thank you. So we're going to kick it off by hearing a bit about each person's startup journey. And starting with Jacinda, I hear that you've never been later than the 20th employee in a company. Is that correct?
That is correct. Unless you count, I was an intern at Google in 2009 when they had maybe 9,000 employees. But my first job, when I was given my offer, there were 8 people at the company. By the time I joined 5 months later, there were 20. And then I was the first non-founding employee at Doctor on Demand. And then at Apero, it was just me and my co-founder.
That's pretty classic for early stage. Ruben, you and Career Karma work with hundreds or even thousands of non-traditional tech talent to help them break into tech, and then you have a podcast for breaking into startups. Can you tell me a little bit about your own breaking into startup career?
Yeah, so I actually bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco, and I lived right down the street here on Guerrero. Had a place to live for a month, which was pretty crazy. My mindset was I wanted to work at startups that were Series B or below, that had a founder or founding team that had the problem themselves, backed by top-tier investors like Initialize, right? And that had a very nice mission and were on an upward trajectory, and where I could add value within that organization. So the first company I worked at was Alt School, and then I worked at Honor, and eventually a company called Hustle before starting this organization. But through that process, it's very important to think about what kind of companies you want to work for. And that led me to essentially creating Career Karma, because after launching the podcast, people came asking me for guidance because I wrote a blog called Breaking Into Startups. And that eventually turned into Career Karma, where we're now helping thousands of people navigate their career.
I love it, and I highly recommend the blog. I was a guest one time. And Jesse, you said you've started 3 startups. Prior to your most recent one, Tanda, you were at Yahoo and then at Splunk. Can you tell me why did you leave Splunk to start another startup?
Yeah, I actually hate startups, so it's true.
But he's doing it again for the third time.
It's like, but you just have to do it, right? And so I think for me, that's the test, where it's like, I was actually retired. And so I had a good exit at Yahoo, and I even when I joined Splunk as a favor for a friend who was my manager. But what was supposed to be a 1-year stint became 5. But I don't know, in the end, I really love culture. Like, I think about engineering culture as something fun, as just like, we create this great culture and we gotta unlock it. And so, yeah, so I'm back. And so, yeah, excited to be here.
Welcome back to startups. A lot of folks, even people who are in startups, have both an idealized version as well as a demonized perspective on what it means to actually work in an early stage startup. What would you like to tell everybody about, or what do you wish people knew and understood about early stage startup life? And I'll start with you, Ruben.
Well, I used to work in investment banking in Atlanta. He and I were actually working together in investment banking. He was my assigned mentee while we're there, and he actually has his own startup now too, which is awesome. But when we were in banking, it's a very clear plan. It's like a defined trajectory. And then when you go into startup world, there's no rules. It's kind of chaos.
Yes.
And so if you're not comfortable with ambiguity, and I'll give you an example. I interviewed for a company called Honor, which was the second company I worked for, and I interviewed for a role in partnerships. And when I joined, the first day she said, you're doing, which was my boss Phaedra, who now has a startup too, she said, you are doing lead generation. And I said, I've never done lead generation before. She said, that's great, that's your job. Figure it out. And over time that actually changed, and she said, you're now in charge of inside sales. And I said, I've never done that. She's like, that's great, you're in charge of that. Then she said, you're in charge of outside sales, no training. She gave me a plane ticket and a rental car. And I had a week to get a lead generated in LA. So flying between here and LA to figure that out. So similar things, came back in charge of outside sales in San Francisco. So it's always like, here's the job, figure it out, we'll give you the tools, and let us know if you need anything.
Sorry, I can interrupt. Did you get a quota with that ticket? Nice.
Real talk, same thing for me. I joined as an ops generalist, and 4 years later, I was head of people and talent in my first startup. Jacinda, you were nodding your head along. Can you share a little bit about what do you wish candidates or just folks outside of startups understood?
Well, I'll start by echoing along with the showing up and having a different job than you interviewed for. My very first job, so you can imagine, I am a new grad, basically. I was hired as a software engineer, and granted, there were 5-6 months between my interview and my start date, but I show up on my first day, and they basically say, okay, you're now director of R&D. This person is reporting to you. We've sold this contract to build a very specific cellular thing that I won't go into. Here's the board for it. You can hire one more person to work on this. It's due in October. This is the beginning of July. And by the way, most of the rest of the team in a couple weeks is flying out to do a demonstration for the Army, because we built a lot of stuff for the Army. So you'll kind of be on your own for a few weeks, go. What I want to say is, on the flip side, if you are looking for the type of place where people will be excited that you want to take on more, startups are for you. As opposed to no, this is your box, you need to fit in this predefined plan. And there are obviously still goals and targets and things that people are trying to hit, but people will be excited if you come up with new ways to hit them in a way that I haven't seen in what I've heard about big companies. I don't know how much I can actually speak to big companies, sorry. But also it's a lot It's hard, but also fun. So
Yes, and you'll hear this a lot, the fast track or the exponential career growth, and literally being the like learning as you go or flying the plane as you're building it. Jesse, is there anything you'd like to add?
That sounds scary, everything they said. It's not scary. It can be. It's certainly, there's this lot of, hey, just jump, you'll figure it out, right? But often it's like, hey, the whole company is helping you, so you're not alone, is what I would say. Who here is scared? Like anyone here feel like, hey, I don't feel safe at my job? I saw some hands, they didn't want to raise their hands, so that's cool. But believe it or not, I believe in today's economy, the safest place to work is actually a startup. Because I can look Ruben in the eye and go, yo, 2 years, right? Like, you're not gonna let me go, right? And the founder here, and Jacinda as well, they can actually promise you. You go to a big company, they can't promise that. So anyway, I think what's not clear, was what not well understood, is actually startups are a great opportunity and actually a lot more safer than you would think.
Yes, I'm biased, but I think it's a great time to join an early stage company, especially a company that was recently funded because, as Jesse just said, runway. And you've got about a 2-year tour of duty, all things being equal, kind of guaranteed. So we're going to talk about culture now. I don't know about you, but I watched all of the Silicon Valley TV show episodes because I felt so seen in some of those episodes. Curious if any of the panelists is willing to share a story of should have been on a Silicon Valley episode. Jesse, you're smiling.
this is being recorded.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know
NDAs,
about
factor in NDAs.
Sure, I'll talk a little bit. So I actually hate Silicon Valley because it's so real. I can't watch it. Because I remember my last company, and it just came out, and we were watching, like, wow, this is so real. It's like they're filming us here. So yeah, it's really legit. But now, like, I actually watch it on YouTube, and I'm like, this is a really good show. It's really funny. But I think the culture to me startups is like, you get to be part of this amazing story. So think about like these great companies, and you get to be like an early person there and really make a difference. If you fuck it up, the company's gonna die. And so yeah, definitely. Like, where else can you have that opportunity? And so yeah, I think culture is a big one. But curious, can anyone define culture? Anyone know what that means? No one knows. Go ahead,
Ruben
Ruben.
knows.
So a lot of times you'll see companies that have these company values, which is why that show can be very comical, because people will say all these like really aspirational values that they don't live. I heard someone define culture as like the actions that people take within the company that are aligned with those values that people are actually saying. So like, it doesn't matter what people are saying. If those actions are being taken, then that is the reflection of what the culture actually is, regardless of what they're saying. So that's what I would say to answer that.
That's good. That's good. I'm gonna one-up him. Let's see if this works. To me, culture is really defining what's it like to work there. That's it. Like I think, yeah, it could be values, it can be all these things, but I think in the end, it's like if you describe what's it like to work there and be there. To me, that's what culture really is. And so, yeah, that's my take on it, but I think his is better.
All right.
Can I say something related to what
Yes,
you said
you
earlier?
can definitely say something.
Let's hear from Jacinda. No,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would maybe one-up you, Jesse.
All right.
Say-
Let's hear it.
We're not competitive in startups at all.
We're all unicorns here. It's all good.
I don't have a competitive bone in my body. It's a lie. Startups are also a great place to be if you are competitive. Culture is what you help make a place to be, and if you're at a startup, you have a much bigger opportunity to make a place the way that you want it to be, with the caveat that obviously it's going to be very driven by the founders. And I know a lot of people say that like culture is like bottom up. I actually disagree. I think it is somewhat top driven. Like if you're at a place where the founder or the founders are more relaxed or more hustle oriented or want everything to be like written down, then you'll have a hard time like fighting against that. And if I would say, like, as opposed to like trying to like fight a company's culture and be like, I'm going to make it the way I want it to be, it's much better to be like, I'm going to look for a place that is what I want to be and make it more of that.
I agree, because if the founder says, work here because it's not going to be fun, I promise you, yeah, I think it's not going to be fun. So.
Believe it. Yeah, so I think everything they say is accurate. The only thing that I wanted to add is some of the things that we talked about could be scary or not scary. I like that you mentioned early stage startups. When they announce funding, it's a really good time to apply to a company because they're going to use that money to hire people, right? So it's a really good, even if the jobs aren't listed on the website, if they've hired, like, just apply, send a message to somebody. When I say apply, email somebody, right? So, and then the other thing that I wanted to say, as far as like a framework, and like how we said that you might be doing a job that's not assigned to you all, Gary Chan actually says a really good framework, which is like you're either learning or you're earning, ideally both. So join a company that is not only aligned with those values, but that can really put you on that accelerated learning and earning trajectory.
I love that.
I love that too. Learning and earning. That should be everyone's goal. I want to talk about stereotypes really quickly. So when we think about early or just startups in general, we often think about young, sometimes 20-something tech bros who got together in college and have an idea that's going to transform the world. So as a 40-something woman of color, doesn't have kids but could have kids, asking for a friend, is a startup for me?
I'll take that. So this is my third company, and recently I met a lot of founders, first-time founders, and the number one question I get asked is not how do you build a company and how do you raise money, it's actually how do you have a family and be a founder. And so I would actually say startups are really family-friendly, and there's a reason why. So when I think back in the day, early in my career in college, I can overnight something and get shit done, right? Easy. But when you have a kid, you cannot do that. It's not possible. And so it forces you to have good scheduling, good prioritization, all these things. And so I actually think startups are a great forcing function to get your shit together and figure out how to plan in time. So I actually think, yeah, startups can be very family friendly. And in our company in particular, many have children, very young children. And so even our co-founder, he recently had twins. So now he has 3 kids. But yeah, I think that's a misconception that startups are very, just grinding, no family, no life, no nothing. I call bullshit. Like, who wants to work at a company like that? Certainly there might be nights like that, but not constantly. So definitely, yeah.
I can also talk about like my experience. I have a 7-year-old. I will caveat that, at least in my experience, the only reason I've been able to do it is having a lot of help as a founder. Like, we have family that lives nearby, and there are legitimately times where my daughter sees way more of her grandparents than she does of me. That also is a caveat because my husband and I are co-founders, so it's not like if there's a crisis at the company, it's not affecting both of us. So there is that. The sort of like quip I give about that is that on the bright side, no one is asking me why I'm working at 10 p.m. Like, I am a bit of, I do work a lot of hours, and I always have. But the flip side is like, no one is asking me why I'm working at 10 p.m. So there's that. The piece that might sound scary about that is that what the founders are doing isn't always that was one of the biggest things for me, is like, employees should be set up to have like work-life balance. Like, our employees don't work weekends or nights unless it's like huge crisis mode. Like, I can't count on a hand like I can count on less than a hand like the times we've even like asked people. Like, I'll always take like people who are really driven, but it's not an expectation that anyone does that. And so I would agree, like, if you're joining a startup and they are working you to the bone, that's like probably a planning issue on their part.
There's big companies that do that too, right? So
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So it's not just
that's not-
startups,
like,
but yes.
like, I bet Ruben can talk about investment banking, and it's
Yeah,
like, if you
I was
want
just
to
about to
work,
say,
it's like,
it really depends on the culture, because like, in investment banking, it was $80, $100 a week, and to their point, you definitely gotta observe the founders and listen to the founders, and some founders are expecting their employees to work at 10 p.m. and are expecting their employees to work on weekends, and they'll be very clear about that, and you should ask those questions actually about the culture. As far as stereotypes, I remember going in, I like the example that you gave of you and your husband. I didn't know that there were married couple founders. Like the second startup I worked at had 2 married couples as founders. I like that you brought up the example of twins, because my co-founders are twins. Both of them are married. One of them has a baby. So you can have a family in a startup. The thing that was also interesting is I thought everybody was young. At the startup that I worked at when I was in outside sales, I had a 60-year-old woman that worked on my team, and she was the top salesperson on my team. People are living longer. 50,000 people are turning 65 every day for the next 19 years. So it's not just a race diversity or sex diversity. It's an age diversity. It's veterans or religious diversity. So like everybody is included in this space. So I would try to eliminate all mental models about like who's supposed to be somewhere and who's not supposed to be somewhere. Actually, this is a better framework. If you're applying to a hot startup, everybody is essentially going to have the same skills when you get to a certain point in the job search process. And what actually differentiates you is who you are and your natural abilities that nobody else has. So make that shine. Don't hide it.
Thank you for bringing that up. I was going to say that, but you said it so much better. Jesse slightly started us off there, but curious, people want to know, why is it a great time to join an early stage startup right now, given the state of the job market? Jesse, do you want to lean into that one?
I do. I think actually every company I've started always start sometime with some kind of recession, and so there's a pattern I noticed. So I think when there's a contraction in the market, it's actually a great opportunity because it eliminates noise. And so I would say the 9 companies here are real companies. And so, right? So yeah.
As opposed to fake companies.
Well, I don't want to get into that, but when there's a bubble, there's a lot of noise. Yeah, so, right. So I think it's a great opportunity to join a startup because again, you think about security, what's the future going? These are real companies doing real things, and so you can actually have a really amazing opportunity to seize. So it's also safer, in my opinion, to work at a startup right now. A lot of big companies. Quick anecdote: I had a friend, someone I mentored. He's here. I won't mention the person. He got laid off. Got a job in another big company. Got laid off again 6 months later. He got laid off 3 times in a row. Now he's looking at startups. So just saying, it's absolutely a real issue today. And so, yeah, really great opportunity.
Right now, in the past, we used to think that large or established companies were more stable, but all of the layoffs or the reorgs are showing that that is no longer the case anymore, and you can't rely on big companies to be that stable long-term career the way that you used to. Anyone else want to say anything before we talk a little bit more about hiring?
The reason that I joined my last company, Doctor on Demand, when I did, was, and I was at a very different stage in life. I didn't have a child, but I was like, I'll go ahead and be the first employee. Like, it's, if it doesn't work out, I'll have tried really hard. And to Jesse's point, you're like, these days just as likely to be laid off somewhere else, so have more fun, do more things. And then if it doesn't work out, obviously none of the companies here are gonna turn out like this, but if it doesn't work out, you have a much wider variety of skill sets to fall back on.
You're actually a lot more employable.
Exactly.
Yes.
And you know what really matters to a company? You don't do this BS about I did XYZ paperwork. No, it's I drove X amount of revenue for the company, or I closed this many sales. I'm an engineer by training, but I run sales at my current company. Like, I couldn't have done that on a normal career track.
All right. I use the term startup ready kind of a lot. We talked about some of the characteristics that make someone startup ready. When you're interviewing, what are you on the lookout for when you talk to candidates to help think about what would be a good fit for, or what would this person thrive in my company right now?
Obsession. Obsession.
Tell us more about obsession.
And obsession doesn't necessarily need to be where you're working $100 a week, but I want to learn from you. I want you to know more about this space than I do, or your role than I do, or just different ways of thinking, or try different things. So I think obsession is a quality that is also infectious. It gets your colleagues to really enjoy being around you, just because the way you communicate and talk is really exciting. And so when I'm interviewing somebody, if they check all the boxes, I'm also looking for obsession.
Thank you. Who else?
Definitely curiosity, which I think goes right along with obsession. Not being satisfied with a surface answer. Not accepting that if someone says, oh no, you have to do it this way, that's actually correct, or that the other person knows necessarily what they're talking about. Figuring out okay, how do I know that this is true or correct, or why this is the way it is, versus someone telling me that it is the way it is.
Jesse, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked with a lot of big companies, a lot of teams. I think the number one thing for me, yes, I agree with obsession and everything they both said, but it's actually more are they fun to work with? So for me, this is our company. We don't want anyone that's not fun, and so yeah. So I think as you think about companies, think, hey, would I like to work with these people? Would I like to be a part of this team? And so I think this is one of the rare opportunities where you actually get to meet the whole team. And at larger institutions, I'm sure you've seen I kind of like those people, not those people. And so, anyways, yeah, definitely for me, it's about fun and people you really want to be a part of.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I have more questions, but want to give anyone a chance to ask anything. Y'all know everything about startups? Yes. Kyle.
Do you guys have any stories of candidates that have really stood out in the process, in the hiring process?
To repeat his question, do you have any stories of candidates who've stood out or been stellar in the process?
Yeah, outside of obsession, I think that you have a lot of people that have great, stellar resumes. You have people that had perfect grades. But what matters to me is what you have actually done. So even if you choose to join a company that's not one of these 9 companies that don't work out, really focus on building something that you can put your name on, so when you join an organization, you can show what you can do. Try to focus less on credentials. That's my bias. I don't think credentials really matter to me. They represent what you're supposed to know, and the best way to show what you know is by building something that demonstrates that. Some of you all don't have the relevant job experience. Just prove that you can do the work, and that's really going to stand out.
Anyone else want to talk about a stellar candidate? They were in the interview.
I'll go with quick ones. This was my last company. I played a lot of ice hockey, so during my face-off, I was like, hey, I remember this guy I knew. I was like, hey, what are you doing these days? Puck drops, and then I scored. And then and then the next puck's about to drop because, yeah, I just got laid off and not working. Puck drops. And then the third puck, I was like, yo, let's get a beer after. All right. And then I scored 3 times in a row, so because I was distracting him. Anyway, so long story short I was like, wow, this guy got laid off 2 years ago, and he's building a mobile app on his own, bootstrap. I'm like, I don't care, I'm hiring him. And he was a great engineer, and so yeah, so definitely as founders, we can trade runway. Like if you see an amazing candidate, and I really like Ruben's point earlier, if you meet a company or a founder you really like, definitely engage, because they might hire you even though there's no job description. And so I hired someone playing hockey, like 3, maybe let me score, I don't know, but yeah, worked out.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Anybody else? Hands high so I can see you. Going once? Yeah.
I was gonna say, what's the best or biggest way you push back on maybe VC or board influence, where you said, I believe this is the direction, and you really went with it even though you got pushed back, might have gotten pushed back from VCs?
All right, to repeat the question, curious if there was an example of a time where you pushed back on what the board or a VC was potentially pressuring you to do because you had conviction.
We still have full control of our company and don't have anyone on the board except my co-founder and me, so.
That helps.
That was going to be my answer too. I haven't had any issues with my board or my investors at all, actually.
Yeah, so we got funding from Initialize and Sequoia. We only have one board seat. I'm sitting in it, so yeah, not a problem.
The answer to your question, maintain your board seats. All right, well, thank you to the panelists for sharing a bit about your startup journey. We are going to go on to the next session.